Hello, and welcome back to Mad Dog Garage. Today, I want to talk about this Macleods 1 3/4 horsepower Model TA engine. This engine was built around 1927. They were sold by the Macleods hardware stores throughout Western Canada. Macleods was a chain of hardware stores you could find in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Most small towns had them. It was basically a rebadged Nelson Brothers engine. Nelson Brothers were a maker of small little engines like this, based out of Saginaw, Michigan. They sold these engines under their Jumbo line. This is a Model TA, which is specifically called a Little Jumbo usually by Nelson Brothers. Other companies sold these engines as well. These companies included Maynard, SunPower, Satley, I think, sold some as well. There's a few others out too. You'll see these engines. The only difference is sometimes the paint color and the name on the side. They were, however, all built by Nelson Brothers. I got this one in mostly original condition. There is still some pinstriping on the sides of the tank here. You can see, I'll zoom in later and show you that. This engine needed a few things. It had definitely been well taken care of, but also had been well used. I had to get a new crank guard, as well as a new muffler, bearings throughout for the crankshaft, oiler, grease cups, and as well as a needle valve for the mixer on the carburetor, or mixer rather. The magneto was rebuilt. It needed a new fuel tank as well, and I couldn't find one available made for this specific model of Nelson Brothers. I could have had one custom made, wouldn't have been too bad, but I got a little Galloway tank instead, straightened out the straps on the bottom, made a groove in the skids, and used that instead. It works pretty good. These engines usually don't need huge tanks unless you're really working them, so just for shows and stuff, the little tank works quite well. I obviously made new skids, fairly simple, just out of 2x4s. The other ones were basically rotted away. This stain on here is probably a little bit lighter than what it would have been originally, but I kind of like it, so I think it turned out. Some things I did included cleaning it up. It was pretty crusty, dirty, and greasy. I wanted to clean it up without taking off the original paint. The plan was always to keep it original, or as at least original as I could, so trying not to destroy the original pinstriping and the original paint that was left on it. I cleaned it up, cleaned the crud out of the gears and everywhere else. It was a lot of work with a fine little brush, but I think it turned out pretty good. I also made a new head gasket, put in some new hardware, new bushing in the rocker arm, tightened some things up that way, a few other little things like that. The carburetor on this engine works as a mixer. There's a needle valve here on the side. This line comes in from the fuel tank. There's a check valve on the bottom of the line. It comes in here, mixes with the air that comes through here, and goes right into this cylinder that way. This is your choke here. It's not really a carburetor. There's no jets or anything in this. It's just literally straight gas coming into this piece of casting here. Hollow casting, I guess it would be. And coming straight into there, mixing with air, and then going into the cylinder. A lot of these engines, unless they were working hard, leaked a little bit of gas out of here, just because when you're only regulating gas with this little needle valve that's meeting into a seat and then through the line here, it's hard to regulate it perfectly well, so quite often there would be some splashing of gas out of there. You'll see when we run it. This engine worked through a hit and miss governor. The idea was that the exhaust valve would be held open when the engine was at speed. This push rod here would lock on this arm back here and would be held open. When the engine slowed down, that arm would come out, allowing that to come back, allowing the exhaust valve to close, meaning then there was suction that was able to come through the carburetor and then fire in the cylinder. The exhaust valve would be held open like this. As you turn the engine over, you can see when the exhaust valve opens, should be about right there. This arm back here, when it was running fast enough, would be held against the push rod. It would meet a little piece of metal that was on the push rod, and it would be held closed until the engine slowed down enough. As you can see, it's locked out right now, and the exhaust valve is held open. There would be no suction that would be able to be created with that, and thus it would not be able to run or fire on those cycles. The governor is back here. There's two weights, and as they spread out, they push this arm against the exhaust push rod and hold it closed, or rather hold it open until the engine would slow down enough. It would then, when the engine slowed down, it would come off it through the springs that are built in and run until it reached its speed, and then it would again hold the exhaust valve open until it slowed down again. There is a speed adjustment on this. You don't want to be adjusting it while the engine is running. There's a spring that kind of works against it to make sure there's some resistance to that, and you have a little bit of speed control then. The oiler up top is something else I got new, replaced on this engine. You can open them up and adjust it so that there's a few drops of oil every minute while this is running. You don't need a lot of oil unless they're working hard. These engines powered pumps, like well pumps, maybe some smaller feed grinders, some smaller things like that. And so when they're working, obviously they might need a little more lubrication. Otherwise, they worked fine with just a couple drops. There are some oil holes that you need to lubricate with a manual oiler. You can just put a drop or two in before you start. There's a grease cup, so you give a bit of a turn to on the crankshaft and connecting rod. There's another oil point here on the rocker arm. Put a few drops in every so often. You don't want to over lubricate because it just makes a mess and is not super necessary. This is a common magneto found on these engines made in the late 20s. It is a Macleods Model EK. The idea here is that this arm here is pulled down, breaking the connection inside, which creates a spark and then goes to the spark plug. These are hard magnetos to test because you got to make sure you get that arm pulled exactly straight down, because to overcome the magnetic resistance, if it's not quite straight down, it doesn't quite get an accurate reading that way. There was like 3 or 4 different setups for how these springs would bring that arm down. You can adjust the timing by adjusting these nuts along this shaft here. What else can I tell you about this engine? Spark plug wire here. You can shut off the ignition here. It grounds it out and turns that off. When you're running this engine for any length of time, you want to have water in the cooling hopper here. You don't want to run without for too long. It gets warm and you could damage it as a result. You also don't want to keep water in here over winter. it could freeze and crack the hopper. You'll find a lot of these can be cracked because of that. The head as well can have cracks in it because the water goes throughout. You don't want that to happen, obviously. There is a small belt pulley on this side you can use with a leather or rubber belt to attach it to a piece of equipment that you want this little engine to power. Like I said, when I got the engine, it was in pretty good shape. The gear on the governor is a little worn out. It's the gears are getting a little sharp, the teeth, but other than that, it's in really good shape. I'll zoom in, I'll show you some of the features, and then we'll try to start it and see it run. I have it on this table. Hopefully it'll be okay. It's not too heavy, but once that all gets swinging, it might start to vibrate. So we'll see how it goes. Okay? As you can see, the intake valve opens through atmospheric pressure. When the piston comes back, it creates that suction that sucks gas into the cylinder as well as air through the intake valve here. So this is connected through here to the carburetor. The exhaust valve, of course, is over here and opens through the rocker arm. The magneto, like I said, has that arm at the bottom there, where that'll come straight down, breaking contact up here underneath this brass cover and creating a spark, which then goes to the spark plug and fires the mixture in the cylinder. You adjust the timing by those nuts on that threaded rod there. Here you can see the governor. These weights right here spread out. The faster the engine goes, and then as the faster it goes, it moves that other arm there to lock out the exhaust valve on the exhaust push rod. If I move this just right, you can see what happens when it locks that exhaust valve out right there. So that is, well, that'll lock that out now, and when those weights slide back in due to a slower speed, there'll be less centrifugal force there, so those will come in and that'll come out and it'll fire, and then it'll speed up again, pushing that arm against the push rod again. There's a spring inside the governor here. It goes to a shaft out here, which then pushes that across over there. That little wheel there against the hopper is a speed control. This spring is getting a little worn out. There's a spot for it to rest in there. Sometimes it slips out, but there should be. You can see the crankshaft back here. The grease cups that lubricate it, they just need to be turned a little bit. That forces some grease down into the bearing. Same with the connecting rod right there. There's some of the pinstriping, original lettering, original sort of darkish red purple paint on the side. New muffler. Little Galloway gas tank that I had fit into the skids there. There's a water drain at the bottom. You can see at the underneath the exhaust valve there that drains the water from the hopper. The needle valve on the mixer, choke, door, down here, fuel line going into the fuel tank, the needle valve come all the way out. You usually have it open about 3/4 of a turn, half a turn to start it, and when it's running, as you can see there, if we can get it to focus, it's just fitted down to a point. There's a matching seat on the inside. The spring helps make sure that it doesn't move while it's running. It locks it in place to run it. Put it all the way in. Don't force it past its side, and then turn it out half a turn, 3/4 of a turn. And you can adjust that to make sure it runs perfectly well. Nice original engine, some pinstriping you can see there on the flywheels. A little pulley. On this side you could use with a belt, run a piece of equipment. Again, you can see the model on the side, cast into the hopper, TA. The brass tag on the front shows that they were called the Macleods engine, sold by Macleods Limited, Farm Supplies of Winnipeg and Saskatoon. The serial number, horsepower designation, and speed of 500 RPM. Okay, let's see if we can get it to run. It's on, doesn't need a lot of oil, but make sure that's on. All the points have been lubricated. Make sure they don't need a lot, and I've lubricated them a lot lately, so as long as every spot isn't running dry, we should be okay. I'll open up the carb a little bit. I don't think it'll need a lot of fuel. I'm gonna need some adjustment there after it starts to run. We'll see if it'll start. Like I said, have the choke partway closed, turn the needle valve on. It doesn't have an advance retard, it's set. What I mean by that is there's no way of starting the magneto in a later position, so it fires at a later point, so you don't have to worry about backfiring. This does that somewhat automatically. It could still backfire, hopefully not, but it is in the starting position as it is right now. We'll see if it will start. Did there. We'll see if we can get it to run. As you can see, there's quite a bit of gas coming out the carburetor here. It's fairly normal on these engines. It takes a little bit to set it just right. Once they warm up, it gets quite a bit better. I'll show you how the lockout hit and miss is working. See, it's only firing every once in a while. Just fired there, fired there. I'll show you how that system works. you can see, obviously you don't want to stick your fingers in there. Those governor weights are spread out. The push rod is locked out right there, slows down, it opens, lets the exhaust valve open or close, and then it fires. Exhaust valve open, 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 closed, fire, open, 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 closed, fire. Adjust that fuel so you get it just perfect. It likes to run fairly rich, and even though it leaks a lot, that does get better once it warms up. You can see the oiler there and how much oil is going through in that little cyclist at the bottom. And that's that. That's this little Macleods 1 3/4 horsepower Model TA engine. Like I said, contract Nelson Brothers, runs really nice. I'd like to get a cart for it. This table is a little sketchy, obviously. It holds it, but you don't want to run it for any length of time like that. Make sure that's closed when the engine's off, otherwise it just makes a mess. Thanks for watching. See you next time.